When I was 15, I got dropped off in a church parking lot at like 5 in the morning with 8 other strangers over in Lake Highlands, not far from here. We drove 14 hours to Cimarron, New Mexico. Does anybody know where that is? Didn't think so. It's like in the middle of nowhere. We were in a Chevy conversion van that had a VCR and a TV combo, which at the time was pretty cutting edge. But we only had one video, it was Ghostbusters 2. And so we watched Ghostbusters 2 like 6 times. And every time I hear Bobby Brown on the speakers, I like think of one of those 6 times that I like watched the movie. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because it was a backpacking trip. We were like a group of misfits that couldn't be with like an established group where you knew everybody, so they threw us together. And we went to the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in New Mexico for like a 14-day backpacking trip. Now this is a part of the Scout program. And if you're familiar with Scouts, like they put the kids in charge. And the adults are just kind of there in the background and be like, you've got it. You know, it's a great organization. But I was put in charge of getting us from day 1 of that trip to day 14 of that trip. And you got to remember that all these people were strangers to me. And so by them putting me in charge, I didn't want to let them know that I didn't actually know how to use a compass. They gave me a map and a compass, and I was just like, you know, I can probably figure this out. And so I figured out like where we needed to go, and I put the compass heading there. I was like, well, it makes a lot of sense that we would just go in a straight line. And so for 10 days, I literally would just be like, okay, that's the direction we go, and we would just go straight through it. And if you've ever done any type of orienteering, you know that's a terrible way to go about it. And 10 days into the 14-day trip, it's a true story, they had to care flight both of the adult leaders out of the trip, because to go in a straight line, we went through rivers, and there was like a cave that we went through, and like through thick brush, and then we went over like Mount Baldy, which is like 13,000 feet, and the 2 adult leaders fell down the mountain. One broke their foot, and the other like injured their knee. And so towards the end of the trip, this helicopter comes in, and a park ranger basically replaces the 2 leaders, because we had to, at the end of the day, have like adult supervision. And this guy was just a college kid. And he also had like a feather earring, which I also felt like was very ahead of his time in like 1997 or whatever. And I remember him saying, dude, you had a map, but you like enthusiastically went in like the worst direction possible the whole time. And so he didn't really have the tact to like sugarcoat that, and he just kept saying that over and over again. I was like, okay, message received. And the reason that I share that story with you is because today I'm more or less like your park ranger. And my hope is that I can show you a map, not necessarily of the mountains in New Mexico, but of what we've learned pretty recently of health and performance, so that you might not enthusiastically head in the wrong direction the whole time. Now you have a little handout here, and if you turn the page, on the first page we're going to dork out just a little bit, because if we don't, it won't make sense why we even have like certain punchlines. So before we talk about the map, we do need to talk about the vehicle that we're responsible for. Our bodies, and our bodies use this thing called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP for short. It's a great $10 dinner board, but all you need to know is that's the currency that our bodies use to make and utilize energy. ATP is synonymous with energy. And so when you look at that little graph there, or picture rather, you can see that there's 3 different ways, if we had to summarize this, that we use energy. Our first priority is where it says a vital biological function. That means your brain's first priority is to keep you alive. That means there's a certain amount of energy that's required to make your organs run. We don't think about that very often because it happens autonomously. The autonomic nervous system is what's responsible for us breathing and pumping blood and all of those things that we don't have to be consciously aware of, but it takes lots of energy to do. That's priority 1. Priority 2 is where it says physical stress and activity. Empowering your activities, like just the energy that it takes to get here and warm up, costs something. To go through a hard workout session, it costs something. Furthermore, mental stress causes energy to be mobilized via this stress pathway that we'll talk about here in a sec. So it's pretty obvious that if I'm doing a bench press, it's like, okay, that takes energy. What's not as obvious is that if you're at work and you're anticipating something stressful is about to happen and it doesn't happen, the same mechanism is at play. So if you've ever wondered why holidays with families are so stressful when you look back and there were no actual like blow-ups or events, it's because you were mobilizing energy this whole time in anticipation for something that was about to happen and it never did. That should be a huge brain explosion there that I just said, because I know at least it was for me. And that's how I came up with the theory of relativity. Just kidding, man. We just got started. So second priority is physical activity. Third and the last priority is this concept of tissue repair and adaptation. So remodeling tissue to become bigger, stronger, faster is the last thing that your brain cares about. How much energy you can create has its limits. For years and years, I thought, and maybe you have too, maybe up until this very moment that I'm about to say this sentence, that physical activity is additive. That means that the more I do, the more my body's going to adapt. 10,000 steps is cool. Well, how about 20,000 steps? Give me my calories, give me my adaptation. And recently, I mean, just as recent as like the last few years, we found that just because your body's increasing its demand for energy, it doesn't mean that your body can match that energy production in a linear manner. That should also blow your mind. The punchline is that your body will take energy away from adaptation and tissue repair if it doesn't have enough to spread out to the first 2 priorities that you demanded of it. That means that these smartwatches, they're not that smart. If I have a big training day and it says I burned 5,000 calories, it doesn't necessarily mean that's like happening right then and there. Because this thing can't factor in the complexity of what's really going on. This is just a silly optical sensor that measures blood flow under your skin. It can't possibly track how stressful your day has been. It can't really do that. Are you with me on that? So when it says that your Fitbit gave you more steps and all these things happen, it's not necessarily true. Now, that's a potentially not a very pleasant thing to hear, but I would rather you be informed with the truth, and I think that you can handle it. Now, turn the page one more time. Now, we're kind of beating around the bush of this concept called stress. And so let's talk about that directly just for a sec. Stress is caused by hormones designed to regulate energy production. We've heard these terms fight or flight, right? That's energy mobilization. I don't know what you guys think about this on the way over here. You ever had something that you thought was about to be really physically stressful and then it wasn't? Did your body like start shaking just a little bit? Can you imagine one of those things like that has happened to you like that? That's your body already mobilizing energy that you didn't need to use. Now, some of that's psychological, but a lot of that is like a biological response. Now, on the other end, when we say rest and digest or a parasympathetic response, That's our body's attempt to promote storage of energy. So a lot of what's happening internally are these big feedback loops between these two mechanisms of, hey, is Spencer trying to do something that needs energy? Or for the love of God, can I shut him down and try to get him into like a storage and recovery mode? Now we think of these big responses of stress like a workout, but again, stress is any kind of stimulation. That siren is a stimulus. These lights are a stimulus. My voice that you're hearing is a stimulus. You just don't think of it that way. So everything that happens to you is falling into those one or two categories. Since they both cost energy, they don't cancel each other out. Now make no mistake, if you have a really elevated training age and you've done a lot of work to condition yourself physically, absolutely, there is some carryover to the other parts of your life where you would also have the psychological stamina and resiliency to handle whatever's going on in the rest of your life. That is true. But you can no longer come in here and say, I got to blow off some stress, because that costs you energy to already be stressed, and this is a stressor too. So in 2025, we can't just close our eyes and do a workout anymore. We have to be a little more nuanced. We have to be a little more strategic. And when you step back and think about that just for a sec, it's not pleasant news, but I think we would all agree that it does sound like it's true. It does sound like it's not as simple as just do hard workouts and everything will work out, bro. It's just not as simple as that. And so one of the big reasons that as a staff we wanted to come and talk to you is because we didn't want you to enthusiastically go in the wrong direction like I did for years. I hung on to the electrical fence for too long. And I'm still like reaping some of those negative repercussions for that. And so we're having this conversation in large part so that you don't make those same mistakes. This little graph here that you see, it's just saying that when lifestyle stress is higher, we can't recover as well from the physical stress that we put ourselves into. So here's the second punchline. Intensity is important. Make no mistake. If you want to adapt from training, you do need intensity. However, intensity is not the only variable. You can think of intensity as this three-part equation. It's 1/3, but what you do outside of training counts twice as much as that 1/3. Turn the page. This is a simplified, just silly little pie graph, so don't judge us for that. But the simplification hopefully makes it seem very elegant what we're trying to talk about. Elegance just means that it's very straightforward. If you increase volume and intensity, you will have to put more care into recovery and into lifestyle, not less. Further, the greater amount of negative stress in your life, and by negative we say that it is distress, which is to say that it is something that you have to address. Life stress increases based on age, gender, genetics, training history, psychological profile. That's going to also require more care. Now you might be asking, what does care mean? It doesn't mean go get your nails done. That's cool. Care is very strategic and it's very straightforward. It means that we need to pay more attention to this balance of high intensity and low intensity. High intensity is what produces adaptation. Low intensity is what's going to jumpstart recovery. Looking down at the bottom where it says recovery and regeneration, we need to activate the parasympathetic, the rest and digest response through these activities that make us feel relaxed. If we can just break that down, it's like you're telling your body like, hey man, we're safe. Like we're good. You know that feeling? That's why Netflix and chill is so popular. It's like the one time of the day where it's like, oh man, I can just put a robe on, I'm good. And then lastly, optimizing your lifestyle to reduce inflammation. Inflammation is basically just chronically elevated levels of stress. So for BPR, instead of being in the game of, hey, let's see how hard we can make your workouts, we're in the game of training, recovery, and lifestyle, which is to say we're more or less entering into the game of stress management, because that's really what we're talking about. Does all this make sense to you so far? I know that's like a fire hose of information. It's like you may have not looked at a pie graph in a long time, but everybody tracking? Okay, cool. What I'd like to do now is maybe break each one of these parts down just in ways where it would be really palatable to understand what actions we can make. Because that information is great, but it's like, what do you do with it? So turn the page. When we talk specifically about volume and intensity, we want to break this down into 3 categories of workouts, 3 workout types that you might see on a weekly basis. When we say Devo, that's short for a development day. And this is a day where we would call our shot and we say, we want to do something that is overreaching a little bit. We want to do something that if we did this every day, you would not be able to sustain this program. Now, it's still good and it's necessary to produce those changes. And so we want to do the following. Instead of it being kind of this watered down thing every day, we want to condense it down into one day. So when you show up for that day, there's a nervousness in your stomach because you know what an RPE of 9 to 10 feels like. There's a nervousness in your stomach because you know what type of attention it takes to lift greater than 90% of your 1 rep max. We want to have those days. Those are good. So I hope nobody leaves here being like, well, intensity is apparently stupid now. It's like, no. It's such a potent and expensive mistress that we're connected to that we gotta respect her. Secondly is what we'll call stimulation days. Now these are moderate in intensity, but that doesn't mean easy. If we're looking at rate of perceived exertion, it's still a 7 to 8. When we're looking at heart rate, it's still north of zone 2. If you've done any type of heart rate training, it's not easy. You have to really be focused and really pay attention, and there's a ton of adaptation that comes from these days, but it's manageable. Last but not least is what we'll call reload, and that is really just being clear that we have to have these kind of days because this is when we can jumpstart adaptation. Adaptation doesn't happen while you're doing a hard echo bike sprint. It happens after. And so there is a compensation that happens after hard training, and we want to have these days that we're leaving feeling great, but my rate of perceived exertion is a 6 or lower. My heart rate is very manageable. I leave with a smile on my face and a sweat on my brow, and we're feeling good. Those are the 3 days that we'll be cycling between, and depending on which week we're in within an 8-week cycle, you might see more of those Devo days, you might see less. We want to progress just like we have been, and to be honest, you've been doing this, but we're just gonna put a name to what we've already been programming. Take this one step further before we move on. We've worked really hard as a coaching staff to be able to make some of these audibles that you would need in real time. So I'll give you a hypothetical. Let's say that you show up for training and it's a Devo day. You know what that means? Yet you got a kid that was up all night throwing up. You're showing up as an athlete that you weren't the day before. You're showing up as an athlete that actually isn't ready to go at an RPE of 9 and 10. The coaches know how in real time to take any of these 3 categories and shift it from one to the other. So whereas we do the best we can with True Coach to kit out what we think that you'll need from a movement selection standpoint, even RPE for that particular day, in real time, you can walk up to us and be like, I'm not ready for this day, and we'll say, we got you. We all know how to do that. I just want to make sure that you know that we know how to do that. Okay, now looking at recovery and regen. Nothing will aid in the recovery debt that we've talked about more than nutrition and sleep. There's lots of stuff that's popular out there. Nothing will ever hold a candle next to great sleep and nutrition hygiene. It's the best thing that we can do. Furthermore, I'm just going to try to really just prop up the coaches. All of the coaches are skilled and they know how to coach through those two things in particular. Nutrition, how to personalize that for you and what makes sense in your life versus like do paleo or here's a macronutrient split. We'll step by step make this work for you. And the same thing with what recovery modalities would make sense for your life. So in this map of health and fitness that we're presenting to you, the concepts of management and balance can't be overstated. It's very easy to take one aspect of health and over-engineer it. Once again, I did that for years. All I focused on was how hard could I make workouts? What's my nutrition look like? Just trying to make my workouts hard, bro. If this is hard enough, who cares? Today we realize, like, man, the challenge of being an adult in 2025 is having all of these things that you're trying to juggle simultaneously. When you go from being 22 to 42, there's also things outside of yourself that you have to manage. And so it's an understatement of the year to say that that's a skill that you need to develop. Now, there are things like you see here that we can specifically condition, like, gosh, emotional regulation. I personally think that that's a root cause of everything that works well for someone's health or what doesn't work well for someone's health. There is the skill of stress toleration, of decompression. Like, those are things that, just like a 1 rep max for a back squat, you can progress and you can start to add on to that over time. But the biggest takeaway here is that coaching at this level is very different than coaching on the rubber mats. If you're in a back squat and I'm at your profile view, I have permission to say, get 2 inches lower, because I'm not doing it. Furthermore, I've been doing this for 20 years. So if you come to me and be like, hey, I need a program so I can climb Mount of the Holy Cross, technically I'm supposed to know how to do that. I can just tell you what to do. But this stuff we're talking about, it's a completely different relationship. It is not me telling you what to do. It is us partnering together, and it's you being the expert of your life, because I'm not with you for your life. I'm with you here when you train. I'm not with you when you wake up with your kids, when you take those 7 meetings throughout the day. With the decompression strategies that you have at the rest of the time you have, I'm not with you. You have to be the expert. You have to be autonomous. You have to be in charge. And so that partnership between coach and client looks drastically different. And so that's not technically a punchline, but I do want you to understand that there are 2 different types of coaching that are happening here. There's what's happening on the training floor, and then when we talk about lifestyle and wellness, it looks like you being the expert of your life. It looks like us holding you accountable for the changes that you're ready to make. This word behavior, I think, looks cool. It's kind of vague. It's like, what does that even mean? But I'll tell you, behavior change is exactly what I just described. You currently have 2 board certified by the Board of Medical Examiners health coaches in here. That's another term synonymous with what we're talking about. That means Marcella and I could stop working here. We could go over and work in Baylor as an integral part of their healthcare program. That's the skill set that I'm talking about. And it is going to be the thing that changes the coaching industry. Just mark my words. We have it recorded. We can go back and look, and this will be when we said, like, oh, Spencer was right.